Good morning. Welcome back to Footsteps of the Past. So, whilst I'm looking for bigger stories, I thought I'd share with you a few stories that I'd found that really haven't had much in the way of newspaper or media coverage back in the time. So, sit back, enjoy these stories, and please like, please subscribe. Fatal accident at Steep Farm. Mary Waller dies. Mary Waller was the grandmother of Mary Ann Waller, whose story I covered in the previous video. And so 13 months later, her grandmother died. Mr. Thomas Waller resided at Steep Farm with his mother, Mary Waller. She was a widow, aged 73. She was in possession of all her faculties and very active. Had never been the subject of fits. Thomas said, I saw her almost the last, about 4:30 yesterday afternoon. She was in this room, the parlour. I next saw her about 2 minutes after leaving my room. My attention was aroused by the smashing of crockery. I called the children and sent them to see. And came back and said Grandma had fallen down the stairs. I found my mother lying on her back at the bottom of the cellar steps. A broken basin was lying by her, and the skimmer was lying under her on the floor. No other person was in the cellar. Had it not been for the breaking crockery, we should not have known. She went down, as was her custom, to skim milk for a calf. James Painter had asked her for milk and last saw her alive. There was a large quantity of blood on the floor and running from her mouth. I do not think that she was 2 minutes from this room before I saw her. She was quite unconscious. Mr. William Holt. Mr. William Holt, a registered practitioner at Petersfield and assistant to Messrs. Whitshire and Cross, who was called immediately, deposed that the cause of death was the fracture of the skull. The fall upon the hard brick floor from the steps would likely be the cause. To the contusion at the back of the head. If a weapon had been used, I should have found an abrasion to the skin. The jury was satisfied and returned a verdict of accidental death. Benjamin Knight was a local miller here in Steep in 1866. And he died at Steep Mill. He was very much a well-known and respected gentleman, and his cause of death was rather strange and painful. It appears that on the 6th of January, from the heavy rain and melting snow, 2 large ponds which supplies the mill became almost suddenly filled to such an extent and weight of water as to prevent the deceased from stopping the same as usual by himself, which however he afterwards accomplished with assistance. Upon being affected, Mr. Knight, perceiving blood on one of his fingers, proceeding from a small scratch occasioned by the cold work of one of the wheels whilst in motion. Thoughtlessly, he applied some of the thick oil or grease in the brass socket of the same to stop the bleeding. This passed on until Wednesday the 7th, when the deceased attended Petersfield Market, where, having transacted his business as usual, returned to his home without complaining. But soon after, pain came on, which increased during the night, and on Thursday morning the thief proceeded to Petersfield and obtained medical assistance from a Dr. Leachman, under whose able treatment he continued. But still getting worse, further medical advice was called upon, which was unfortunately of no avail, as the deadly poison had taken too strong a hold upon the system for relief. Early on the Tuesday morning, the unfortunate man ceased to exist, after the most painful suffering since the preceding Thursday, being 17 days since the application of the poisonous grease. The sad story of William Aldred. William Aldred lived near the church here in Steep. So, on a Sunday afternoon, William Aldred was found dead with his throat cut, the injuries having evidently been self-inflicted. It appears that the deceased, who was a widower, aged 86, was a very old inhabitant of this parish, and had lived near the church for some years. His health had been failing for a long time, but he was able occasionally to get out of doors. Mrs. Fanny Hall, a widow who lived nearby, used to attend to him and tidy up his rooms. He was always very poorly, and sometimes in the morning appeared to be suffering a good deal and used to groan and moan. He used to complain about his health, but did not seem particularly depressed in spirit. He was rather quiet in his ways, but never gave any indication of suicidal tendencies, and had never threatened to do anything of the sort. Dr. Pankridge had attended him for general debility and old age, and saw him on the Saturday morning when he was in his usual health. On the Sunday morning, about 10 o'clock, Mrs. Hall went in as usual to tidy up his room, and she found him washing up the breakfast things in the scullery. And he seemed about his usual self. His son-in-law, Frank Clark, and his grandson, George Clark, a lad of 13, also saw him sitting by the fire in his sitting room about 8 o'clock, when he said he had had a very bad night and had been up all night, but did not threaten to do anything to himself. The grandson again visited him about 12:30 and stayed with him about 10 minutes, but did not notice anything different in his manner. The lad was in the habit of taking him at dinner from home on Sunday, but on this occasion, William said that his mother was not to send it up that day. In the afternoon, however, between 4 and 5 o'clock, William's son-in-law found him lying on his face in the scullery with his head in the sitting room, an open razor covered with blood by his side, and a very large gaping wound in his throat. He was quite dead. There was a basin in the sink with a large quantity of blood in it, and also blood on the floor. Deceased apparently held his head over the basin until he felt faint and fell to the ground. Dr. Pancrease was summoned and at once came to the conclusion that the fatal wound was self-inflicted. The inquest was held at the Cricketers Inn, just down the road there, by a Mr. Edgar Goble, county coroner, and a jury of whom Mr. W.W. Waters was chosen as foreman, Frank Clark, cowkeeper, living at Steep, the son-in-law, referred to. George Clark, deceased grandson, Mrs. Hall, and Dr. Pancrease gave evidence to the above effect. The coroner inquired of the son-in-law if he had ever heard anything about the deceased trying to get into a pond. Witness said 3 or 4 months ago, deceased was believed to have wandered in his sleep and had stepped into a deep ditch of water in Mr. Bradley's park up to his knees. This woke him up, and coming to himself, he returned home. He did not say he had been out on purpose. A witness, when deceased told him the next morning, said he had been out in the night, told him he must have been dreaming. But there was no doubt he had been out of the house as the woman who lived next to him had to dry his clothes. The jury returned a verdict of suicide whilst temporarily insane, and on the suggestion of the foreman, who said he had known the deceased for 27 years and knew the family to be a very respectable one. A vote of sympathy was passed with the relatives. The coroner endorsed this expression and remarked that it was a very sad case. So, Frank Clark, you'll recognise the name of, as he was my great-great-grandfather. William was Frank's father-in-law. So William was my 3 times great-grandfather. So that concludes this episode of Footsteps of the Past. As I said earlier, these stories were not big enough in content really to dedicate a full episode to them. So thank you for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and if you have any family members or family stories that you would like us to look into and maybe do an episode on, please leave a comment in the comments below. In it, I will also put the email address for Footsteps, and I look forward to hearing from you. You know, we are based in Hampshire, so we can cover a lot of Hampshire, Surrey, West Sussex. So, thank you very much. And remember, no one knows where their history may take them.